The racist journalist believed her arguments were impeccable until Michael Jordan eviscerated every word she uttered live, before millions. The WGN Chicago studio crackled with palpable tension. The harsh studio lights illuminated two titans locked in a gaze. Michael Jordan, with his magnetic aura, and Tessa Vaughn, the 42-year-old blonde journalist notorious for her incisive and often controversial questioning. "Good evening, Chicago." Tessa beamed at the cameras, but a predatory glint underscored her smile. "Michael, you know our viewers relish it when we host icons like yourself. But tonight, I want to delve beyond the trophies and records. I want to discuss issues that genuinely resonate with America." Jordan adjusted his tie, his eyes sharp and appraising. 63 years of life had taught him to recognize that particular inflection. "Of course, Tessa, I'm here for any conversation." Tessa leaned forward, coiled like a viper ready to strike. "Michael, don't you think it's time we ceased fixating on racial issues? Wouldn't it be more beneficial to simply move forward?" A heavy silence descended upon the studio. The live audience, predominantly black, shifted restlessly in their seats. The cameras precisely captured the moment Jordan's expression transmuted. "Move forward?" he repeated, his voice slow, calm, yet laden with a dangerous undertone. "Precisely," Tessa crowed, convinced she had landed a decisive blow. Many Americans feel that certain communities leverage racial matters as a pretext, as a crutch to evade personal accountability. The air grew electrified. Producers murmured behind the cameras. Everyone sensed an explosive confrontation brewing. Jordan interlaced his fingers, leaned forward, and met Tessa's gaze directly. When he spoke, his voice sliced through the silence like a stiletto. "Tessa, did you just characterize the civil rights struggle as a crutch?" Tessa blinked. For the first time in her career, she had profoundly misjudged her adversary. "Well, that wasn't precisely what I—" "It was precisely that," Jordan interjected, his voice unyielding. "And now you're going to hear my perspective on it." The studio held its breath. Tessa Vaughn, the interviewer who habitually maintained absolute control, had just spectacularly lost her grip, and Michael Jordan was merely warming up. The cameras documented every flicker of her facial muscles, every bead of perspiration beginning to materialize on Tessa's brow. The man who had faced the sport's greatest challenges was about to demonstrate that some adversaries are far more perilous off the court. The war had begun. The tension was palpable. Tessa Vaughn had just awakened something within Michael Jordan that she could never have imagined existed. "Michael, let's be practical." Tessa regained her composure, consulting her notes with that icy confidence. "Currently, how many opportunities do Black people need? Affirmative action, special programs, Black History Month? Isn't it a bit excessive?" A murmur of indignation swept through the audience. Jordan kept his eyes fixed on her, but his jaw was now clenched. "Excessive?" His voice emerged low, dangerous. "Yes!" Tessa perked up, believing she had found an opening. "Look at you. You made it. Barack Obama made it. Oprah made it. Why can't other Black people make it without special help?" The studio turned frigid. Even the cameraman stopped moving. Jordan took a deep breath but maintained his calm. "Tessa, are you suggesting my individual success negates centuries of systemic injustice?" "No, but—" she began but felt she was losing control. "Are you saying that because a few of us broke through the barrier, racism is over?" Tessa shifted in her chair but doubled down. "Michael, let's be honest. There are statistics showing problems within the Black community. When are we going to talk about personal responsibility instead of always blaming the system?" The audience audibly gasped. Tessa had crossed a dangerous line. Jordan closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, there was a steely determination that made Tessa instinctively recoil. "Personal responsibility?" He repeated each word with surgical precision. "Exactly." Tessa forced a smile, but her hands trembled imperceptibly. "Interesting." Jordan leaned forward. "Then tell me, Tessa, when a Black child is born into an under-resourced neighborhood with dilapidated schools, no opportunities, is that also their personal responsibility?" "Well, Tessa stammered. When a black youth is stopped by the police 3 times more than a white youth for the same reason, is that personal responsibility? Michael, you're twisting. Twisting? His voice sliced through the air like a blade. You just suggested on national television that my people are irresponsible. The silence was deafening. Producers whispered urgently behind the cameras. Tessa tried to regain control. I didn't say that. I'm merely questioning whether it wouldn't be better to focus on practical solutions. Practical solutions? Jordan rose slowly. Like how we ignore 400 years of slavery and another 100 years of Jim Crow? That was in the past, Michael. The past? He walked until he was directly in front of her. My grandparents lived through Jim Crow, Tessa. My grandparents. That's not ancient history. Tessa was visibly sweating. Michael, please, let's keep this civil. Jordan stopped and looked at her with an intensity that made the entire studio hold its breath. Civil? Like you questioning the legitimacy of the civil rights struggle on national television? Then something shifted in his demeanor. Jordan returned to his chair, but there was something different in his eyes now. A determination that made Tessa realize she had made a terrible mistake. You know what, Tessa? You want to talk about personal responsibility? He smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then let's talk about it in a way you never imagined. Tessa swallowed hard. What do you mean? You'll find out. Jordan laced his fingers together. And when you do, you'll understand why your questions are far more dangerous than you realize. The studio was in complete suspense. Michael Jordan returned to his seat with calculated movements, like a predator that had just fully assessed its prey. Tessa, his voice was controlled, but there was steel behind it. You want to understand why civil rights still matter? I'll explain it in a way even you can comprehend. Tessa tried to regain her composure, straightening papers with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. I'm listening, Michael. When I was starting out in the NBA, the 80s, do you know how many black head coaches there were in the league? I don't know the exact number. 0. The word echoed through the studio. 0 black head coaches in a league where 75% of the players were black. Is that a coincidence, Tessa? Jordan leaned forward, his eyes piercing hers. When I wanted to start my first business, do you know how many banks turned me down for a loan? Even as Michael Jordan. Michael, those are isolated incidents. Isolated incidents? His voice rose an octave. 3 banks, Tessa. 3 banks told me that investments in athletes are risky. But millions were loaned to white businessmen with no sports background. The public grumbled indignantly. Tessa was clearly uncomfortable, but she attempted to counter. But you managed to overcome that. I overcame it because I fought against the system. Not because of it. Jordan slammed his fist on the armrest of his chair. Do you understand the difference? He stood again, but this time his posture was different, more professorial, more controlled. Let me explain something about civil rights to you, since you clearly don't get it. His voice lowered, forcing everyone to lean in. Civil rights aren't about getting free stuff. They're about getting the same opportunities you've always had. Michael, I never got anything for free. Never got anything for free? Jordan laughed, but it was a humorless sound. Tessa, have you ever been followed in a store just because of the color of your skin? No, but have you ever been pulled over by the police in your new car because you didn't look like you could afford it? Michael, that's not... Have you ever walked into a boardroom and had to prove you belong there instead of being automatically respected? Each question was a hammer blow. Tessa visibly shrank in her chair. Jordan continued, his voice gaining power. Civil rights mean my children can walk into any school, any university, any business, and be judged by their character and competence, not by the color of their skin. He paused for dramatic effect. Does that bother you, Tessa? Of course not. I just think... You think what? Jordan interrupted. That we've arrived? That racism is over? The studio was in dead silence. The cameras captured every micro-expression. I'll give you numbers since you like facts. Jordan pulled his phone from his pocket. Black men still earn 73 cents for every dollar white men earn for the same work. Black women earn 63 cents. Tessa tried to interject. But there are other factors. What factors? Jordan's voice boomed. Education? Black college graduates earn less than white high school graduates. Experience? Black men with 20 years of experience earn less than white men just starting out. He walked until he was right up to the cameras. Are these your practical solutions, Tessa? Ignoring these numbers? Tessa Vaughn knew she was losing, but her arrogance wouldn't let her back down. I'm going to tell you a story that will shatter every ignorant preconception you hold. What story? Tessa asked, her voice now considerably softer. The story of someone you could never judge. Jordan sat down, but kept his gaze fixed on her. Someone who taught me more about faith, strength, and responsibility than you could learn in 10 lifetimes. He paused, a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. But before I tell this story, I need to ask you a question, Tessa. A question that will change everything. What question? Tessa could barely speak. Jordan smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Do you believe in God? The entire studio held its breath. Tessa blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting this question. What does that have to do with? It has everything to do with it. Jordan leaned forward. Because the story I'm about to tell only makes sense if you understand that we are all children of the same Father. Tessa was visibly sweating. Michael, actually, I'm an atheist. A deafening silence fell upon the studio. Jordan nodded slowly, as if this answer explained everything. That explains a lot, Tessa. Now I'm going to tell you why you're completely wrong about everything. Jordan took a deep breath, and his posture shifted entirely. The anger gave way to something deeper, more powerful. He looked at Tessa with a mixture of compassion and determination that made the entire studio feel that something monumental was about to happen. Tessa, let me explain something you clearly don't understand. His voice came out low, but laden with a moral authority that made everyone lean forward. We are all children of God, all of us. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic. It doesn't matter. Michael, I already told you I'm an atheist. I know what you said, Jordan interrupted her gently. But that doesn't change the truth. You may not believe in him, but he believes in you. Tessa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Something in Jordan's change of tone was disconcerting her more than his previous anger. And if we are all children of the same Father, Jordan continued, his eyes never leaving hers, then none of us should be treated differently because of our skin color. None of us should face discrimination. None of us should be judged before we even open our mouths. Michael, that's very beautiful, but, his voice rose slightly. Are you going to lecture me about human equality? Tessa swallowed hard. I just think mixing religion with social issues complicates things. Complicates? Jordan leaned forward. Tessa, who do you think led the civil rights movement? Martin Luther King Jr. was a pastor. Rosa Parks was a devout Christian. The black church was the heart of the struggle for equality. But that was in the past. The past? Jordan slammed his hand on the armchair. You think faith stopped mattering? That God stopped caring about justice? The studio was in absolute tension. Cameras captured every bead of sweat beginning to form on Tessa's brow. Michael, I respect your faith, but I don't see how. You don't see because you don't want to see, Jordan rose slowly, because it's easier to ignore divine conscience and treat people like statistics. He walked to the edge of the stage. Do you know the difference between someone who believes in God and someone who doesn't, Tessa? Enlighten me. She replied with a sarcasm she immediately realized was a mistake. Jordan turned to her with an intensity that made the entire studio tremble. Those who believe in God know they will be held accountable. They know that every word, every action, every moment of discrimination will be judged. Those who don't believe, they think they can say anything without consequence. Tessa was visibly uncomfortable now, shifting in her chair as if unable to find a comfortable position. Michael, you're being unfair. Unfair? Jordan laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. Tessa, do you know what's unfair? Unfair is having to explain to an adult why discrimination is wrong. Unfair is having to justify our humanity on national television. He walked back near her. But you know what God taught me? That even when people attack us, we must respond with love. Even when they question our dignity, we must show compassion. Jordan sat down but kept his eyes fixed on her. That's why I'm here, Tessa. Not to destroy you, but to educate you. Because I believe there's still hope for you. Jordan returned to his chair, but there was something different in his posture now. The anger had transformed into something more powerful. A quiet determination that was even more intimidating. Tessa, let me ask you a direct question. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it that made the entire studio pay attention. You truly don't believe in God? Or do you simply not wish to believe because it would be inconvenient for your worldview? Tessa hesitated, clearly not expecting this approach. I am an atheist, Michael. I believe in science, in reason, in facts. Facts? Jordan smiled, but it wasn't a mocking smile. It was almost compassionate. Tessa, you've just spent the last 30 minutes ignoring facts about racial discrimination. What science is it that you follow? Tessa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Let me ask you something else, Jordan continued, his voice softening. When you were a child, did you believe in something greater than yourself? Did you ever feel that sense that there was something divine in the world? That's beside the point. It is the point. Jordan leaned forward. Because something made you stop believing. Something hurt you so badly that you decided it was easier to believe in nothing. Tessa blinked rapidly, and for the first time on the show, she appeared vulnerable. Michael, let's not turn this into therapy. I'm not doing therapy, Jordan replied gently. I'm trying to understand how someone reaches the point of denying the humanity of others on national television. I never denied. You did, his voice boomed, but he immediately returned to a calm tone. You spent this entire interview treating Black people as a problem to be solved, not as people made in God's image. The ensuing silence was deafening. Jordan took a deep breath, his expression softening completely. Tessa, do you know the moment that marked me most in life? No, she answered hesitantly. It was when I understood that God makes no distinction between his children, that he loves the Black boy from the ghetto just as much as he loves the white girl from the suburbs, that he weeps when any of his children suffer injustice. Jordan stood up and walked slowly. When you deny God, Tessa, you lose that perspective. You start seeing people as data, as statistics, as problems. You forget that each one of them is sacred. Michael, I treat all people with respect. Respect? His voice echoed through the studio. You spent an hour questioning me about why we still talk about civil rights. How is that respect? Tessa lowered her head. I was just doing my job. Is your job to question people's humanity? Jordan moved closer to her. Is your job to perpetuate stereotypes that hurt entire families? He stopped right in front of her. Or should your job be to seek truth and promote understanding? Tessa couldn't look at him. I think I lost my way. You lost your way because you stopped believing there's anything greater than yourself. Jordan sat down again. When you don't believe in God, you become the God of your own life. And gods don't need to care about others. The studio was in absolute silence. Tessa, I'm going to tell you a story. Jordan interlaced his fingers. A story that will change everything you think about faith, about responsibility, about what truly matters in life. What story? Tessa asked, her voice barely a whisper. The story of someone you would have judged in 2 seconds. Jordan looked directly at her. Someone who taught me more about God, faith, and strength than any preacher or book. Who? Her name was Kesha, he stated plainly, and something in the way he uttered the name made the entire studio understand this story would be different. The studio fell into absolute silence. Jordan looked down at his hands for a moment, as if gathering the strength to recount a story that clearly affected him deeply. Kesha Williams, he began, his voice low but clear. A single mother, 23 years old with 2 small children. She lived on the south side of Chicago. Tessa tried to interject. Michael, I don't see how. You will see, his voice cut through the air. Sit there and listen. Jordan rose and began to walk slowly. I met Kesha in 1995. I was volunteering at a community clinic. It was one of those places where uninsured people could get basic medical care. He paused and looked directly into the cameras. Kesha was in the waiting room with her 4-year-old son in her lap. The boy had a raging fever. He was coughing relentlessly. You could tell he was very sick. Jordan resumed his pacing. She had been there for 6 hours. 6 hours. Because it was the only clinic that took people without insurance within a 20-mile radius. And she didn't even have the money for the bus fare home. Michael. Tessa started to say something, but Jordan ignored her completely. Do you know why she didn't have insurance, Tessa? He turned to her with an intensity that made the journalist recoil. Because she worked 3 part-time jobs. None of them offered benefits. She cleaned offices overnight from 3 to 7 a.m. She worked at a diner in the morning from 8 a.m. to noon, and she cared for the elderly in the afternoon from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Jordan walked until he was right in front of Tessa. 3 jobs, Tessa. 3. 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And still, she couldn't afford a decent apartment. She lived in a rat-infested basement because that's all she could afford with what was left over. But Michael, there are government programs. Programs? His voice boomed. You think she didn't try? Do you know how many times she was humiliated in government offices? How many times they told her she was just another lazy Negro trying to get over on the system? Tessa was visibly uncomfortable, but Jordan wasn't finished. You know what else, Tessa? Kesha had 2 college degrees. 2. She had a degree in accounting from the University of Illinois and a master's in administration. Perhaps she lacked the qualifications for the job she wanted. Jordan stopped walking and looked at her with an expression that made the entire studio hold its breath. She didn't have qualifications? His voice was dangerously low. Or perhaps she didn't have the right color to work in the downtown offices? He returned to his central position. Do you know how many job interviews she had that year, Tessa? 47 interviews for junior accounting positions, 47 consecutive no's. Jordan sat on the edge of the table. And do you know what she told me at that clinic when we finally managed to talk? Tessa didn't answer. Mr. Jordan, I pray every day for God to give me the strength to keep going. Not for myself, but for my children. They didn't ask to be born black in an America that doesn't want them. The silence in the studio was absolute. Jordan slowly stood up. So I asked her, how do you maintain your faith after all of this? And you know what she replied. He looked directly at Tessa. She said, Mr. Jordan, if I lose my faith, I lose everything. Faith is the only thing that gets me up every day. It's the only thing that tells me my children deserve a better future. It's the only thing that stops me from giving up. Jordan walked until he was very close to the cameras. At that moment, Tessa, I understood something that changed my life forever. Faith is not a crutch for the weak. Faith is the strength that keeps people standing when everything else crumbles. Jordan returned to his chair, but his energy had completely shifted. Now he spoke with a moral authority that made the entire studio feel the weight of every word. Tessa, do you want to know about personal responsibility? His voice was laden with emotion. Kesha woke up at 2:30 a.m. every day. Every day. She made breakfast for her children, left them with the elderly neighbor who watched them for free because she understood the struggle. He paused, letting the image sink in. She took 2 buses and a train to get to her first job downtown. She cleaned 15 floors of offices in 4 hours. Then she rushed to her second job at the diner, where she endured racist remarks from customers and her own boss. Michael, that's admirable, but what? Jordan leaned forward. Are you going to tell me she didn't try hard enough? That she wasn't responsible enough? Tessa swallowed hard. No, I just think... You think what? Did she choose to be poor? Did she choose to raise 2 children alone in a dangerous neighborhood? Did she choose to be rejected at every job interview despite having better qualifications than most white candidates? Jordan stood up again. Let me tell you what really happened, Tessa. The boy's father, Dr. Richard Patterson, a successful plastic surgeon, white, married, 2 houses, 3 imported cars. The studio was completely silent. Kesha met him at university. He was an assistant professor. She was a student. He promised he would leave his wife as soon as she graduated. Of course, he never did. When Kesha got pregnant with their first child, he disappeared, changed his number, changed his job, vanished. That's terrible, but there's always a but with you. Jordan slammed his hand on the chair. Always a way to blame the victim. Always a way to justify injustice. He walked to the edge of the stage. Do you know how Kesha survived all of this? Faith. Faith. Tessa. Every morning, before waking her children, she would kneel beside the bed and pray. She asked God for strength. She asked for protection for her boys. She asked for patience to endure another day of humiliation. Jordan turned to her. And you know what else? She never, ever lost hope because she believed God had a better plan for her and her children. Even when she couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, she believed it was there. Tessa was visibly shaken. Michael, I understand that faith can be comforting. Comforting? His voice echoed through the studio. Tessa, you don't understand anything. Faith wasn't consolation for Kesha. It was fuel. It was what made her wake up every day. It was what made her keep looking for a job after 47 rejections. It was what made her believe her children could have a better future. He walked back to her. You never had to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying medicine for your sick child. You never had to explain to a 4-year-old why there are no Christmas presents. You never had to pray that the car wouldn't break down because you don't have money for repairs. Jordan sat down and looked directly at Tessa. But Kesha did. And do you know what she told her son that Christmas with no presents? Tessa shook her head. She said, Son, Jesus was also born poor, in a manger, with nothing, and he became the most important man who ever lived. Being poor doesn't mean you're worth less. It means God is preparing you for something great. The studio was in complete silence. And you know what happened? Jordan continued, his voice growing more intense. That boy grew up believing that. Today he's a doctor, Dr. Michael Williams, a pediatrician. He works at a free clinic in the South Side, helping children like he once was. Jordan leaned forward. That's the difference between having faith and not having it, Tessa. Kesha managed to raise a son who became a doctor, not in spite of the difficulties, but because of the faith she instilled in him, because she never let him believe he was lesser than anyone else. Michael. Tessa tried to say something, but her voice was weak. And the second son? Jordan didn't let her finish. Marcus Williams, a civil engineer, graduated from MIT. Today he designs affordable housing for low-income families because he never forgot where he came from and the faith his mother had in him. Jordan stood up. That's personal responsibility, Tessa. A woman who raised 2 successful professionals while working 3 jobs, enduring discrimination, but never losing faith, never teaching her children hatred, always teaching love, forgiveness, and determination. Tessa tried to regain control of the situation, but she was clearly shaken. Her voice came out less steady than before. Michael, it's a touching story, truly, inspiring, but, well, these are individual cases. We can't base public policy on individual cases, however moving they may be. Jordan looked at her with an expression that mingled disbelief and pity. Individual cases, he repeated slowly. Tessa, there are millions of Keshas in this country, millions of black single mothers working multiple jobs, raising children alone, facing discrimination every single day. But Michael, not all of them. Not all of what? His voice exploded again. Not all of them deserve dignity? Not all of them deserve equal opportunities? Not all of them deserve to be judged by their character and not by the color of their skin? Tessa tried a different approach. I just think that sometimes people play the victim. They use their difficulties as victimization? Jordan stood up so quickly that Tessa flinched. You just heard the story of a woman who worked 3 jobs, raised 2 children alone, faced constant discrimination, and maintained her faith despite all adversity, and you call that victimization? He walked until he was directly in front of her. Tessa, do you know what your problem is? You've never truly suffered in your life. You've never had to fight for anything. You were born into privileges you don't even recognize. So you can't possibly grasp what it's like to have to prove your worth every single day, simply because of the color of your skin. Michael, that's not fair to me. Not fair, Jordan laughed, but it was a bitter sound. You want to talk about what's not fair? It's not fair for a mother with 2 university degrees to have to work 3 jobs to support her children. It's not fair for a black child to grow up believing they are worth less than a white child. It's not fair to have to be twice as good to get half the opportunities. Jordan returned to center stage. And you know what else isn't fair, Tessa? Having to sit here and explain the humanity of my people to someone who should already know better. Having to justify why we deserve basic rights. Having to prove that our struggle is legitimate. Tessa was clearly losing the argument. Michael, I think I'm starting to understand what you're saying. She asked for protection for her boys. She asked for patience to endure another day of humiliation. Jordan turned to her. And you know what else? She never, ever lost hope because she believed God had a better plan for her and her children. Even when she couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, she believed it was there. Tessa was visibly shaken. Michael, I understand that faith can be comforting. Comforting? His voice echoed through the studio. Tessa, you don't understand anything. Faith wasn't consolation for Kesha. It was fuel. It was what made her wake up every day. It was what made her keep looking for a job after 47 rejections. It was what made her believe her children could have a better future. He walked back to her. You never had to choose between paying the electricity bill or buying medicine for your sick child. You never had to explain to a 4-year-old why there are no Christmas presents. You never had to pray that the car wouldn't break down because you don't have money for repairs. Jordan sat down and looked directly at Tessa. But Kesha did. And do you know what she told her son that Christmas with no presents? Tessa shook her head. She said, Son, Jesus was also born poor, in a manger with nothing, and he became the most important man who ever lived. Being poor doesn't mean you're worth less. It means God is preparing you for something great. The studio was in complete silence. And you know what happened? Jordan continued, his voice growing more intense. That boy grew up believing that. Today he's a doctor, Dr. Michael Williams, a pediatrician. He works at a free clinic in the South Side, helping children like he once was. Jordan leaned forward. That's the difference between having faith and not having it, Tessa. Kesha managed to raise a son who became a doctor, not in spite of the difficulties, but because of the faith she instilled in him. Because she never let him believe he was lesser than anyone else. Michael, Tessa tried to say something, but her voice was weak. And the second son? Jordan didn't let her finish. Marcus Williams, a civil engineer, graduated from MIT. Today he designs affordable housing for low-income families because he never forgot where he came from and the faith his mother had in him. Jordan stood up. That's personal responsibility, Tessa. A woman who raised 2 successful professionals while working 3 jobs, enduring discrimination, but never losing faith, never teaching her children hatred, always teaching love, forgiveness, and determination. Tessa tried to regain control of the situation, but she was clearly shaken. Her voice came out less steady than before. Michael, it's a touching story, truly inspiring, but, well, these are individual cases. We can't base public policy on individual cases, however moving they may be. Jordan looked at her with an expression that mingled disbelief and pity. Individual cases, he repeated slowly. Tessa, there are millions of Keshas in this country. Millions of black single mothers working multiple jobs, raising children alone, facing discrimination every single day. But Michael, not all of them. Not all of what? His voice exploded again. Not all of them deserve dignity? Not all of them deserve equal opportunities? Not all of them deserve to be judged by their character and not by the color of their skin? Tessa tried a different approach. I just think that sometimes people play the victim. They use their difficulties as victimization? Jordan stood up so quickly that Tessa flinched. You just heard the story of a woman who worked 3 jobs, raised 2 children alone, faced constant discrimination, and maintained her faith despite all adversity, and you call that victimization? He walked until he was directly in front of her. Tessa, do you know what your problem is? You've never truly suffered in your life. You've never had to fight for anything. You were born into privileges you don't even recognize. So you can't possibly grasp what it's like to have to prove your worth every single day simply because of the color of your skin. Michael, that's not fair to me. Not fair? Jordan laughed, but it was a bitter sound. You want to talk about what's not fair? It's not fair for a mother with 2 university degrees to have to work 3 jobs to support her children. It's not fair for a black child to grow up believing they are worth less than a white child. It's not fair to have to be twice as good to get half the opportunities. Jordan returned to center stage. And you know what else isn't fair, Tessa? Having to sit here and explain the humanity of my people to someone who should already know better. Having to justify why we deserve basic rights. Having to prove that our struggle is legitimate. Tessa was clearly losing the argument. Michael, I think I'm starting to understand what you're saying. Starting, his voice cut through the air. Tessa, you spent an hour questioning the legitimacy of the civil rights struggle, calling discrimination an excuse, suggesting we should just move on and ignore centuries of injustice, and now you're starting to understand? He sat down but kept his eyes fixed on her. You know the difference between you and Kesha? She never judged anyone without knowing the full story. She never assumed someone was lazy or irresponsible just because they were struggling. She never used her position to diminish other people. Jordan leaned forward. Because she knew pain, Tessa. And those who know true pain have compassion. Those who know suffering understand that sometimes people need help, not judgment. Those who have truly fought know that life isn't fair for everyone. Michael, I never meant to diminish anyone. But you did. His voice echoed through the studio. Every question you asked, every suggestion that racism is an excuse, every insinuation that we should just move on, all of it diminished the struggle of millions of people. Jordan stood up and walked slowly. And you know what else saddens me the most? You have a platform. Millions of people watch you. You could use that influence to educate, to foster understanding, to build bridges. But you chose to use it to perpetuate division and ignorance. I really didn't intend that. Intention doesn't matter when the result is harm. Jordan turned to her with an intensity that made the entire studio tremble. Your words are hurtful, Tessa. Your questions perpetuate stereotypes that cost real people jobs, opportunities, dignity. He returned to his chair. But there's still time, Tessa. There's still time for you to learn. For you to understand that advocating for civil rights isn't asking for freebies. It's asking to be treated as a human being. It's asking for our children to have the same opportunities as yours. It's asking for justice, not privilege. Tessa Vaughn was visibly shattered. Her hands trembled slightly and she seemed to have shrunk in her chair. The arrogant confidence from the beginning of the program had completely vanished, replaced by a vulnerability she clearly wasn't accustomed to showing. Michael, her voice came out hesitant, almost a whisper. I need to admit that perhaps I've been unfair. Perhaps I haven't considered all the perspectives I should have. Jordan looked at her with an expression that mingled moral victory and emotional exhaustion. Perhaps? He repeated the word with disbelief. Tessa, you spent nearly an hour questioning the humanity of people who face discrimination every single day. You suggested that centuries of fighting for justice are just excuses. That's not perhaps unfair. That is profoundly wrong. I didn't question anyone's humanity. You did! His voice echoed one last time through the studio, but now there was more sadness than anger. Every time you implied that racism is victimhood, you questioned our experience. Every time you said we should move on, you denied our right to seek justice. Every time you suggested our problems are personal responsibility, you ignored centuries of systemic injustice. Tessa lowered her head, and for the first time on the program, she seemed genuinely ashamed. Michael, I think I need to process everything you've said. I think that perhaps I've been wrong about many things. Process? Jordan leaned forward, his voice softer now but still firm. Tessa, this isn't new information. This pain, this struggle, this injustice, All of it has existed for centuries. It's documented in books, films, academic studies. The only difference is that today you were compelled to hear it from someone you couldn't ignore or dismiss. The host, who had remained silent throughout the emotional outburst, attempted to regain control. Well, folks, I believe we've reached the end of our time, and it certainly was an intense conversation. No, Jordan raised his hand, his authority irrefutable. I'm not finished. He turned to the cameras, his demeanor shifting to something more professorial, more statist. I want to speak directly to everyone watching. If you are Black, if you are Hispanic, if you have ever felt the weight of discrimination, if you have ever been judged by the color of your skin before even having a chance to show who you are not alone. His voice grew more resonant, more impassioned. Your struggle is real, your pain is valid, your pursuit of justice is legitimate, and you have every right to demand to be treated with dignity and respect. Don't let anyone convince you that you are overreacting or playing the victim. You know your own experience better than anyone. Jordan turned to a different part of the studio. And if you are white and watching this, if some of Tessa's questions resonated with you, if you've ever thought, maybe Black people are just overreacting a little bit, I implore you to reflect deeply on what you've heard today. He paused for dramatic effect. Talk to Black people, listen to our stories, try to understand a perspective different from your own. Because if you truly believe in equality, in justice, in treating everyone with dignity, then you need to understand that the fight is not over. Jordan looked directly into the main cameras. And to everyone, regardless of skin color, who believes in God as I do, our faith calls us to something greater. It calls us to see every person as our brother or sister, to fight for justice, to defend the oppressed, to be the change we wish to see in the world. His voice softened, but lost none of its power. Because in the end, we are all children of the same Father. And if we truly believe that, then we cannot stand idly by in the face of injustice. We cannot ignore the pain of others. We cannot accept a world where a person's worth is determined by the color of their skin. Tessa attempted one last interjection. Michael, I want you to know that I never, ever intended to cause pain or perpetuate. Tessa, Jordan interrupted, but now his voice was laden with a weary compassion. Intent doesn't matter when the outcome is suffering. You may not have meant to hurt anyone, but your words did. Your questions perpetuated stereotypes that harm entire families. He paused for a long moment. But there is still hope for you, Tessa. There is still time to learn, to grow, to use your platform in a way that builds rather than destroys, that educates rather than ignores, that unites rather than divides. Jordan stood up one last time. Because if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that we are all capable of change. We are all capable of growth, and we are all capable of doing better when we know better. The studio was in absolute silence. Tessa couldn't look at Jordan, nor at the cameras. She had been utterly dismantled, not by aggression or personal attacks, but by the relentless force of truth and lived experience. The host made one last attempt to wrap up the show. Michael Jordan, Tessa Vaughn, thank you for this intense conversation. We'll be back next week. But no one was paying him any attention. All eyes were on Jordan, who remained standing for a few more seconds, letting the weight of his words fill the studio completely. When the cameras went dark, the studio remained in an almost reverent silence for several seconds. It was as if everyone needed a moment to process the emotional intensity of what they had just witnessed. The audience, predominantly composed of Black individuals, was visibly moved. Tears streamed down the faces of many women in the crowd. An elderly man in the front row, appearing to be in his 70s, slowly rose and began to applaud. His hands trembled slightly, but he clapped with a resolve that made the entire studio understand. This applause signified far more than mere approval. It was recognition, it was gratitude, it was validation. Others quickly joined him. A young Black woman, around 25, stood up crying and shouted, "Thank you, Michael. Thank you for speaking for all of us." Soon the entire audience was on their feet, applauding with an intensity that seemed to make the studio walls tremble. It wasn't just applause, it was a collective emotional release. It was the sound of people who finally felt truly represented on national television. Tessa Vaughn rose from her chair as if in a trance. Her hands trembled noticeably as she removed her microphone. She glanced around the studio once, saw the tears of emotion in the audience, saw Jordan's quiet strength, and simply couldn't remain there any longer. Without a word, she walked swiftly towards the backstage area. Her steps were uneven, as if she were fleeing not just the studio, but a version of herself that had just been exposed under the harshest possible spotlight. A young man about 20 years old managed to approach the stage and yelled to Jordan, "Mr. Jordan, my grandmother went through what Ms. Kesha went through. She worked her entire life cleaning rich people's houses to raise us. Thank you for honoring her story." A middle-aged woman with tears in her eyes managed to approach. "Michael, I've been a teacher for 30 years. I'm going to show this video to my students. They need to hear this. They need to know that our struggle is valid." The show's producers were clearly shaken. The executive producer, a white woman in her 50s, whispered to her assistant, "In 30 years of television, I've never seen anything like this. This wasn't just an interview. This was a historic moment." "This will be everywhere in an hour," the assistant replied, already checking social media on her phone. "The clips are already being posted." The cameraman, a black man who had worked on dozens of shows, approached the producer. "You guys know what just happened here, right? This is going to change conversations. It's going to make white people uncomfortable, and it's going to make black people feel seen." Jordan finally stood, acknowledging the audience with a nod before heading backstage. But he was immediately swarmed by crew members, all eager to express how deeply they'd been affected by what they'd just witnessed. The makeup artist, a young Latina woman, approached him, tears welling in her eyes. "Mr. Jordan, I'm not black, but I'm a daughter of immigrants. When you spoke about dignity, about all of us being children of God, I felt that right here," she said, touching her chest. A veteran white cameraman, around 60 years old, hesitantly came forward. "Michael, I have to admit, some of Tessa's questions at first, they made sense to me. But hearing your story, man, I'm ashamed. I'm genuinely ashamed I thought that way." Jordan placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Don't be ashamed of learning. Only be ashamed if nothing changes after you know better." Meanwhile, Tessa had retreated to her dressing room. The small, claustrophobic space seemed to mirror her own emotional turmoil. She sat before the mirror, staring at her reflection as if she didn't recognize the person looking back. Her phone began to vibrate incessantly. Messages poured in, second after second. "Tessa, I just saw. What was that? Did you lose your mind? How could you ask those questions? Was that journalism or a racist attack? You just committed professional suicide on national TV." But it was a message from her own mother, sent just 10 minutes after the show concluded, that hit her like a physical blow. "Honey, I'm watching online. I am embarrassed, deeply embarrassed. This is not how we raised you. These are not the values we tried to instill. I need time to process what I saw." Tessa read the message 3 times before she could fully absorb it. Her own mother, the woman who had always championed her, always supported her career choices, was ashamed of her. The following morning at 8:47 a.m., Tessa Vaughn broke her silence with an Instagram post that stunned everyone. The post was accompanied by a simple photo, just black text on a white background, no filters, no production, only raw words. "I spent all night awake in prayer." Yes, prayer, reflecting on yesterday. But it was one specific comment that captured the special attention of millions. "I am Kesha from the Michael Jordan story. Yes, that is me. And I want everyone to know, Michael Jordan saved my life that day at the clinic back in 1995. Not just with the money he gave me to cover my son's medical bills, but by showing me I had worth when the entire world was telling me I didn't. Today, 29 years later, I am the CEO of my own accounting firm, Williams and Associates. My sons, Marcus and Michael, are college graduates. Marcus is a civil engineer from MIT, building affordable housing. Michael is a pediatrician, working at a free clinic on the south side of Chicago. Tessa, I accept your apology. But I want you to remember there are millions like me. Treat us with dignity. See our humanity. Recognize our strength. And Michael, if you're reading this, thank you. Thank you for seeing my humanity when others only saw statistics. Thank you for planting seeds of hope that have blossomed into 2 careers that are now serving our community. This comment was shared more than 800,000 times and sparked a new wave of emotion across social media. People began sharing photos of the Williams family, articles about her company, and stories about how her sons were indeed giving back to the community exactly as Jordan had stated. In the 5 days following the program, Michael Jordan's team was completely overwhelmed. His personal inbox, which normally received hundreds of emails a day, was getting thousands. His lead assistant, Sandra, who had been with him for over a decade, had never seen anything like it. "Michael, we need more people just to sort through these messages," she said, entering his office in Charlotte with a stack of printed emails. "That's over 50,000 messages since yesterday, and they're still coming." Jordan was sitting behind his desk, reading some of the messages Sandra had handpicked as the most impactful. His eyes were red, not from fatigue, but from emotion. With each letter he read, he felt the weight of the words sinking deeper into his heart. It was as if each story was a mirror of his own mother's struggle decades ago. "Sandra," his voice was raspy, "these people, they are living through what my family lived through. It's like no time has passed. Every single person writing to me, they aren't just statistics, they are real stories, real pain, real hope. I want you to personally reply to every single one of these messages. Every single one. Let's figure out how we can support not just her, but all these people who are trying to make a difference." Jordan paused, looking at Sandra with an intensity she'd never witnessed before. "And Sandra, I want to make one last video about this. These people deserve to have their stories honored. They deserve to know that their words touch my heart just as I hope my words touch theirs." He sat down, but there were still tears in his eyes. "Because this is bigger than basketball, Sandra. This is bigger than any trophy I've ever won. This is about using the platform God has given me to plant seeds of hope, dignity, and real change." "Let's make it happen, Michael," Sandra replied, visibly moved herself. "We really will," Jordan said, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, "because these people trusted me with their most intimate stories. And I will not let them down." 3 weeks after the show, Michael Jordan decided to make a final statement on the episode. He recorded a 15-minute video in his Charlotte office, which quickly became the most shared and impactful post of his career. The video began with Jordan sitting calmly behind his desk, wearing a simple blue shirt with no excessive fanfare or production. Just a man speaking directly to the camera, as if having an intimate conversation with each person watching. "Over the past 3 weeks, I've received over 100,000 messages regarding my conversation with Tessa Vaughn," he began, his voice calm yet charged with purpose. "I want to take this moment to speak to you all directly about what I've learned, about what you have taught me, and about where we go from here." He leaned forward slightly. "First, to my Black community, to my family, to everyone who saw themselves in Kesha's story. You do not need to justify yourselves to anyone. Your struggle is real, your pain is valid, and your right to equality is non-negotiable. Do not let anyone diminish your experience or question your humanity. You are valuable, you are loved, and you deserve dignity simply for existing." His voice grew more intense. "To the young Black people watching, you are more than statistics. You are more than the circumstances that attempt to define you. Each of you possesses limitless potential. But remember, you do not need to be perfect to deserve respect. You do not need to be exceptional to deserve opportunities. You are worthy of dignity and equal chances simply by being children of God." Jordan paused, his expression softening. "To my white community watching, I know not all of you think as Tessa did. I know many of you are genuine allies, people fighting alongside us for justice. But if some of her questions resonated with you, if you've ever found yourselves thinking, perhaps Black people are exaggerating a little, I implore you to deeply reflect on what you've heard." He stood and walked closer to the camera. "Talk to Black people. Listen to our stories. Not to argue or rebut, but to understand. Read our literature, watch our films, grasp our perspective. Because if you truly believe in equality, in justice, in treating everyone with dignity, then you need to understand that the fight is not over. Jordan returned to his chair, but maintained direct eye contact with the camera. And to those who believe in God, as I do, our faith calls us to something greater than ourselves. It calls us to see every person as our brother or sister, to fight for justice when we see injustice, to stand up for the oppressed when we witness oppression, to be the change we wish to see in the world. His voice softened, but lost none of its power. Because in the end, we are all children of the same Father. And if we truly believe that, then we cannot remain silent in the face of injustice. We cannot ignore the pain of others. We cannot accept a world where a person's worth is determined by the color of their skin. Jordan leaned forward again. Kesha's story is not unique. In the past few weeks, I've received thousands of similar stories. Single mothers struggling, fathers working multiple jobs, children dreaming of a better future despite every barrier. Entire families transformed by education, by opportunity, by the simple dignity of being seen as human beings. He paused, letting that sink in. Some of those people are watching right now. To you, I say, do not give up. Your struggle has purpose. Your perseverance inspires others. Your faith, whether in God, in humanity, or in something greater than yourselves, that faith is powerful. It can move mountains. It can shatter barriers. It can transform generations. Jordan rose and moved to a more central position. But I also want to talk about hope, about change, about the power of an honest conversation to touch hearts. Because you know what impressed me most during these 3 weeks? The messages from people who shifted their perspectives. His voice grew more animated. I received hundreds of emails from white people saying, "Michael, I'd never thought of it that way. I never truly understood what you go through. You changed my mind and my heart." Jordan offered a genuine smile, the first seen in the video. And you know what that taught me? That most people aren't malicious. Most people don't wake up wanting to hurt others. Often, ignorance stems from a lack of exposure, a lack of honest conversations, a lack of opportunity to hear different perspectives. He returned to his position behind the desk. That's why conversations like the one I had with Tessa are important. Not because I wanted to humiliate her, it was never about that, but because sometimes we need uncomfortable conversations to reach genuine understanding. Jordan looked directly into the camera. And you know what gave me the most hope? Tessa has changed. She's truly changed. In recent weeks, she's been using her platform to elevate Black voices, to share stories of families like Kesha's, to foster understanding. That shows me it's never too late for anyone to grow. His expression grew more serious. Because ultimately, we are all on a journey. We are all capable of learning, of growing, of doing better. The question is, will we choose to grow? Will we choose to listen? Will we choose to love instead of hate? Jordan stood up one last time. To everyone watching, regardless of skin color, regardless of background, regardless of beliefs, we have a choice to make every single day. We can choose to see the differences that divide us, or we can choose to see the humanity that unites us. We can choose to perpetuate stereotypes, or we can choose to break down barriers. We can choose to remain silent in the face of injustice, or we can choose to speak truth with love. We can choose fear of the different, or we can choose curiosity about other experiences. His voice grew more passionate. I choose to speak. I choose to fight. I choose to believe we can do better. I choose to believe that every difficult conversation, every moment of vulnerability, every shared story can plant seeds of change. Jordan walked closer to the camera. And I invite each of you to make that same choice. Talk to people different from yourselves. Question your own biases. We all have them. Stand up for justice when you see it denied. Treat every person you meet with the dignity they deserve. Because ultimately, we all want the same basic things: to love and be loved, to work and be respected, to dream and have the chance to achieve those dreams, to protect our families, to leave the world a little better for our children. Jordan returned to his chair one last time. This isn't about politics. This isn't about dividing people into groups. This is about remembering that we are all human beings made in God's image, and we all deserve to be treated with dignity, respect, and love. If my conversation with Tessa made you think, if it made you question your biases, if it made you more compassionate towards others, if it made you understand that our fight for equality is real and necessary, then it was worth every difficult moment. His voice softened, almost paternal. Keep asking questions, but questions that come from a place of genuine curiosity, not judgment. Keep learning about experiences different from your own. Keep growing in empathy and understanding. And above all, keep treating every person you meet as the precious human being that they are. Jordan looked directly into the camera one last time. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for allowing me to share our story. And remember, change starts with each and every one of us. It starts in every conversation we have, every choice we make, every moment we decide to see the other as a brother or sister instead of an enemy. Kesha's story continues through each of you who decides to do better, through each person who chooses dignity over discrimination, through each heart that opens to understand instead of judge. He smiled genuinely. Together, we can build a world where every child, black, white, any color, can dream without limits and be judged only by the content of their character. Thank you. God bless you. May we continue to build bridges of understanding, one heart at a time. The video concluded with Jordan offering a warm smile to the camera, his message of hope and unity resonating within the minds and hearts of all who watched. Within 48 hours, the video had amassed over 100 million views, been shared across every social platform, and emerged as one of the most impactful moments in the history of social media discourse on racial issues. Because some conversations change everything, and sometimes all it takes is someone brave enough to speak truth with love, compassion, and an unwavering faith in humanity's capacity for growth and improvement. If this story has touched your heart, then subscribe to the channel right now and activate the notification bell. Don't miss any of these stories that can shift your perspective on humanity, faith, and courage. Subscribe now and become a part of this community that believes in the transformative power of truth told with love.